This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Twilight Show. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm joined by Rashidat Sadiq, who's a teacher and educational consultant based in Nigeria. Among other things, Rashidat is particularly interested in storytelling. So we'll be talking about this and lots more in our show today.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Twilight Show, everyone. I'm Graham Stanley, speaking to you live from Mexico City. As I mentioned in the introduction, on today's show, I'll be talking to Rashidat Sadiq about storytelling and other aspects of her work and educational interests. As well as a teacher and educational consultant, Rashidat is an experienced educational specialist with a demonstrated history of working in the individual and family services industry, strong educational professional skills in coaching, classroom management, lesson planning, educational technology, and instructional design. I'll be talking to Rashidat about these and more after the Teachers Talk Radio news.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online, and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Just Stop Oil have spray-painted universities across England. The climate campaigners used orange paint to coat buildings at the universities of Leeds, Manchester and Cambridge, according to a report on the BBC News website. The latest protests came after other universities across the country were also targeted. Just Stop Oil say the protests are against the UK government's plans to licence new oil and gas projects. The BBC report featured comments from a spokesperson for University of Leeds, which said that whilst they support the right to legal protest, they were hugely disappointed that the results had been vandalism. At the University of Cambridge, a protester painted the neo-Gothic King's College orange and was confronted by members of the public. The majority of protesters have been arrested and charged with criminal damage. After the Tory party conference, attention turned to Labour's proposals for education should they be elected. Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Education Secretary, said a Labour government would upskill non-maths specialists in primary schools to create the maths equivalent to phonics. The announcement marks a clear dividing line with Conservative policies, with Labour focused on the youngest school children, whilst Conservatives have focused on extending compulsory maths teaching to 18. The curriculum review would also be tasked with bringing maths to life and directing teachers to show children how numeracy is used in the world around them. The plans have been tentatively welcomed by the NAHT, and General Secretary Paul Whiteman said it was vital that Labour builds upon the excellent maths teaching that is already taking place. Jeff Barton of Askell added, ensuring that primary schools have the funding for the resources they need was vital to improving attainment. After the distressing news of events unfolding in Israel, many news outlets have reported on government plans to support Jewish schools with extra security guards. Security and police patrols have already been increased, but the government has given £3 million in funding. Measures taken by some schools already include pupils being told to remove blazers and school trips being postponed. The BBC also reported that 3 schools have closed due to concerns. The Community Security Trust CST, which provides protection for Jewish communities in the UK, said there had been 139 anti-Semitic incidents since the recent attacks on Israel. At this time last year, there had been only 21 incidents. A government spokesperson said it was very concerned a small number of Jewish faith schools had temporarily closed, and that it would be working to support them to open safely. Finally, BBC Wales education correspondent Bethan Lewis writes that children as young as 7 or 8 are using social media, according to a major survey in Wales. Responses from more than 32,000 children aged 7 to 11 suggest almost half use social media sites or apps a few times a week. Public health experts said the data was concerning, as most social media carry minimum age recommendations of 13. Parents also responded, with many saying they found it hard to strike the right balance between the benefits and pitfalls of smartphones. Full details of the survey can be found on the BBC Wales section of the news website. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Hello and welcome back, everyone, and welcome in particular to my special guest, Rashidat Sadiq. Thank you so much for joining me, Rashidat. What have you been up to today?
Thank you, Graham. It's a great pleasure to be here. Today has been a little bit busy. I did get to rest in the morning and spend time with my family. Then I attended a Toastmasters event. I'm a member and I practiced some of my speaking skills there. And I came back home and got ready to be with you.
Oh, wow, Toastmasters. Now, I've heard of Toastmasters before, but I've never participated or heard of anyone who's actually been part of them. Could you tell us a little bit more about what it involves?
Okay, so Toastmasters basically was founded in the US about 100 years ago, and initially was done to encourage young men to develop their public speaking and leadership skills. And now it's in so many countries all over the world. It's in Nigeria and Africa, and we joined just to have a safe space to practice our speaking and to grow as leaders, to network with other people. So it's a good thing.
Sounds great. That sounds really good. So Rashidat, I usually start by asking my guests to talk about how they became teachers. So what was it that attracted you to education? How did you get started as a teacher?
Yeah. My teaching journey is quite interesting because that wasn't what I studied in school, but I've always loved teaching. Like even when I was younger in primary school, I used to teach my junior ones. I used to teach my dolls, I was that child that would line up the dolls and teach them what I was taught in school.
Fantastic.
So, but moving on, I decided I wanted to go into something medical, and I studied veterinary medicine, worked a bit in the field. But when I started having children and I started taking my children to school, I would just hang back a little bit, watch their assemblies, and I just got drawn in and realized that this was where I wanted to be, molding lives of youth. And I knew that we did have a bit of a teacher gap in Nigeria, not enough people in the profession, and I just decided to go for it.
Oh, wow. So you came quite late then to teaching
Yes,
after
very
you
true.
had your children, you said.
Not all the children. I had when I had my after I had my second child. Yes.
Hmm. All right.
Yes.
Wow. And so what did you do to get started then as a teacher? Did you go back to school or?
Yes. So initially, I volunteered at my children's school to work
Yeah.
part time, and when I did realize that that was for me, I went to get a PGDE, and then later on, I got a CELTA, and I've done so many courses ever since, and hoping to do more.
Wonderful. And was it clear from the start that what you wanted to be involved in was teaching English, or did you get involved in teaching other subjects?
I did get involved with teaching other subjects. I was a bit into science. I taught a little bit of French, but I think my strength was in English. And then I knew that not so many people, had that strength that I had. So I just decided to hone it and build on it.
Yeah, makes sense. And what about the veterinary science then? Did you ever have you had ever have you ever had any regrets about not becoming a vet?
Well, no, I never have because I did practice for about 4 years,
Mhm.
and it wasn't as fulfilling as teaching is. It had its good parts, but I think I'm just in love, and I decided to stay here because I've been teaching now for over 10 years. This is where I'm gonna stay.
Okay, good to hear it. And do you have a favorite age group to teach? Is it primary? Is it secondary? What is it?
Okay, so I do teach a wide range, but I think my favorite would be upper primary, junior secondary. That range from maybe 9 to 12 or 13.
Right. Yes. I think that's a nice age to teach, isn't it? What is it about
Yeah.
that age group that appeals to you?
I think they're old enough to comprehend a lot of nuances, but at the same time, they're still at that level of innocence where they are willing to play with you. They're not trying to feel too big. They don't mind, getting down and having fun with you. They don't see you as too old or old school. So it's
Right.
fun to be with that age group.
Yes. No, I think I agree with you. I think that age group is a very fun age to teach. And it's before they become self-conscious teenagers, and
Yeah,
then it
exactly.
becomes a little bit hard to get anything out of them.
Exactly, exactly. But like I said, I've taught a wide range and I still do have interactions even with teens. But I think the day-to-day teaching, I prefer the that age.
Right. And I'd love to hear more about the education system and teaching English in Nigeria. Is it a compulsory subject? Is that from primary, secondary, or how is it?
Okay, so in Nigeria, English is our lingua franca. So it's sort
Mhm.
of like the mode of instruction everywhere. Although
Right.
there are some policies, the national policy does allow for children to be taught in the native language up to primary three. But most schools, almost all institutions actually start even the nurseries with English. So English is compulsory, and all our higher education is in English compulsorily.
Okay. I apologize. I didn't realize English was the lingua franca in Nigeria for some reason. I imagine there's probably a lot of other languages. Is that the case?
Yes, we do have over 200 tribes and
Wow.
languages in Nigeria.
Wow. That's amazing. And how many languages do you speak?
I speak two fluently. I speak Yoruba and I speak English fluently. Then I do have a bit of Arabic, a bit of French. I think that's it.
And is it typical when you're in the classroom to have a real mixture of languages with the students, or do they generally predominantly speak a particular language in a particular area of the country?
It does depend. There are different languages in different areas, but depending on the type of school, it's a federal, like it's a republic, so there's a
Mhm.
lot of intercultural mixing. So you are
Right.
likely to get it's rare to get just one single language in a class. You're likely to get at least two or three, you know, even in some areas where you have like faith-based schools or other schools that might limit the range, but it's really, you hardly get just one single tribe or language in a classroom.
Okay, right, understood. And what about what you actually teach? Is it mainly language, or do you teach literature and other things when you're teaching English?
Okay, so it's a mixture of everything. We teach language, especially in the younger classes. We teach literacy, and then as they grow
Right.
older, we also move into literature. So I do have like guided reading sessions with my children or with the students and pupils. I have we look at the literary devices in our reading texts, but in the higher secondary school, there is a separate literature as a subject for those that would like to go into the arts, probably.
And I imagine, given that it's a lingua franca, motivation of the students isn't difficult, or am I wrong?
Well, it depends. So for me, I live in a metropolitan area, so motivation is not a problem at all. Most of them are used to English. They have exposure to international television, cable, and all of that. But we do have some of the rural areas where it's difficult to get them to speak English. It's difficult. You have to use a multilingual approach if you want to get them to understand and to move on. So yeah, it depends. But generally, I haven't had that experience of lack of motivation, but I know a lot of teachers who have.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, so English is a lot more spoken in the metropolitan areas and the large cities, etc.
Yes, yes.
Right. Yeah. And I'd like to move on now to talk about storytelling, which we've made the kind of focus of this show, this chat we're going to have. And I know you're particularly interested in this, and that also you have a lot of experience with storytelling. What is it that appeals to you, and why do you think it's important for teachers to know about?
Okay, so storytelling is magical, and I think we all believe the same. And it's in the African context, it's even more important because for a long time, our traditions were passed down orally through stories. I mean, before the advent of television, we used to have tales by moonlight where you'd gather around in the compound, around a tree with a grandmother or an old aunt, just telling you stories, folk tales, or stories about your ancestors and whatnot. So it's a very African thing, and it appeals, to the students I teach. But even on a global scale, I know we all love stories. Everybody loves a good story, even if it's a story about your neighbor. You tend to just lean in and want to know what's going to happen next. So it's a beautiful way to teach because you get a lot of the learners tuning in. You don't really have to convince them. They want to know what's going to happen next. And the beautiful part of storytelling is that all the language skills are are involved or can be involved. So you have listening skills, and if you're able to make your storytelling participatory or interactive, like the session I had with you, you have speaking skills, and you can develop that into writing skills and reading skills. So it's a good pivot, to get into all the aspects of English language teaching that you'd want to as a teacher.
Of course, yes. And speaking of when we first spoke, we first met when you kindly joined a storytelling session that I was doing for a teacher development course recently. And we talked briefly in that session about different kinds of storytelling that exist. And I remember you talking about the techniques that you were particularly interested in. Could you tell us a little bit more about those? Because I think you have a number of techniques that you employ in the classroom that you're particularly fond of. Is that right?
Yes, yes. So I've experimented like over a year now with storytelling, and I've tried to use storytelling to introduce grammar. That works well. One good thing I like is that aspect of having the learners participate. So I like to pause in the middle of a story and ask for predictions. And that helps because the learners know they need to be on their toes. They're also able to be creative as they sort of want to co-create the story with you. It helps with their inference, it helps with their conclusion, it helps with their sequencing. So there's so many skills that just that what do you think is going to happen next brings, or what do you think will happen to so character, you know. So there's that aspect that I love. I also love the aspect that I can reach deeper and ask about feelings and start to get authentic language from the learners. You know, how would you feel if you were this character, or how do you think he felt? So they're able to really speak. And one beautiful part of storytelling is that even when you don't have learners who their language is well developed, you can introduce a chant, you can introduce action and miming, things that get them to participate and be part of the story. I like that aspect of storytelling. I also employ role play. So sometimes you listen to the story, and at the end of the story you get the learners to form groups and recreate some certain aspects of that story. And it also gives them an opportunity to really digest the story. Sometimes they use their own words, you know, to say what the characters would say. Retelling and summarizing are also other techniques that we use with storytelling to really get the learners to participate. Sometimes you even tell them, you give a writing task and you ask them to create a different ending, or to write the story from another character's point of view. You know, all of those different techniques, and there's so much more. Recently I started introducing personal storytelling in the classroom, and I tell a story from my personal history. And before I start the story, I tell them the topic of the story, the title, and I ask them to guess or to tell me the things they'd want to know. You know, so that already gets us exchanging ideas, and they get really eager to know more. And it's wonderful how sometimes pupils don't know that you're a human being outside the classroom, but when you tell them a personal story, their eyes light up. Oh, so you have children? Oh, so you do this, you know. And it makes you build a bond and build a better rapport. There are so many of those techniques. I hope I haven't made a ramble, but I guess I've shared some.
No, no, not at all. You've shared a lot of very different techniques, or a kind of summary of them, which it sounds fascinating. What I love about it is that it's never just about the story, is it? It's all about what you can do before and after and around the story, and making use of the story as a platform to examine language and to encourage
Yes.
practice, and as you said, to personalize what you're doing with the students so that they become better familiar with yourself and the others as well, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you have any particular favorite stories, Rashidad? Do you mentioned talking about sort of stories about yourself or your life, but is that mainly what you focus upon, to try and get the students to tell stories about their own lives, or do you also look at stories in the news or traditional folk stories, or any other ones as well, or is it a combination?
I think I'd say it's a combination, although I don't go too much into stories in real life.
Hmm.
But a lot of folk tales, traditional tales, personal tales, fairy tales, um,
Hmm.
you know, wisdom tales. So in West Africa, here we have a lot of the tortoise trickster, wise man, clever man kind of stories. So I try to use that because that reminds me a lot of my childhood, and I personally forgot a lot of the stories I learned as a child. So
Right.
it's interesting to me to start to do that research all over again, talk to some people I know, read books, go on the internet, you know, to try to find those stories. And I think it's good for us to share with the children or the learners as a part of identity building, because I
Hmm.
realize that a lot of personally, and even with the children that we have now, I grew up on Enid Blyton and Roald Dahl books.
Right.
So, you know, after that stage of listening to storytelling, I sort of started to lose my culture. And I see a lot of the learners now, maybe not with books, but with TV shows, because they're on this Disney Channel, they're on Nickelodeon, So we have that risk of not being able to get the values um, that are native to us, of losing them totally. For me, I think I want to build learners that have a sense of identity but can fit in globally anywhere. So bringing those folk tales, uh, exploring some of the values and the themes and the lessons within. I love that aspect of moral, being teaching morals without being preachy, and
Yeah.
allowing the
Yeah.
learners to pick the lessons sometimes even on their own. When we share, what did you learn? What did you get? Some of the things I never thought of, the learners are going to say as what struck them from the story.
Right. Of course. Yes. And that's it. I think you've hit upon an important point here as well, isn't it? In every culture, we have such a rich background of folk tales and traditional stories that, in many cases, are in danger of being lost because of the kind of globalized TV and cinema, etc., that we tend to get easily, well, ready access to as well.
Yeah.
Is there a kind of movement to try and recover the folk tales of Nigeria, the traditional stories? Is there a kind of literature of that available? Has it sort of become more? Has it become stronger because of the internet or through books, etc., or is it still in very much in danger of dying out? Do you think?
Um, I'm not sure I can say, but I know that
Mm.
people are starting to become more aware. So we have new, younger authors, children book authors, adapting the stories more and more. And we have access even online to ebooks, folk tales. Now, if you even on Google, there are many websites that promote folk tales. So I don't think they can die out. On YouTube, there are videos that are now in animation form, that promote
Yeah.
these old folk tales. And I think we are moving also um, towards a dynamic where, apart from the old folk tales, we have creators making new heroes, with African backgrounds. So
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes with a mixture of the old, some of their superpowers are going to be related to mythology from way back, but it's still more advanced. So a sort of Superman, but the African version, with African powers or something like that. So I think
Wow.
um, we are slowly moving to that sense of consciousness where people do want to maintain their identity while still being part of the growth and technological advancement of the global world.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic to hear. Um, I wonder if it mightn't be too much to ask to have you tell us a little bit about one of those stories or one of those heroes. Um, could you do that? Is it something that you could readily tell us a little bit about, or at least summarize one of the stories?
Okay, so I think I can do that. There's so in African culture, there
Mm.
depending on which part of Africa you are, we do have different protagonists, but they tend to have the same character. So, for example, in Ghana, you'd hear of Anansi the spider. In some parts of North and East Africa, you'd hear of the hare, the wise hare.
Hmm.
In Western Nigeria, we have the tortoise. He's the wise man. And he has, you know, two or three different personas. In some stories, he's wise and clever and helpful. In other stories, he's a trickster, but then he always gets what's coming to him. So I'll just give a brief of one of the
Great.
stories. The way the story goes is that the lion was the king of the jungle, and he ruled very, very kindly and wisely and nicely. And one day, the elephant just took a look and thought to himself, I'm bigger than that lion. I'm better than that lion. I'm stronger than that lion. Why should he be king? I think I'm going to be king. And he went off to face the lion and said, "Oh, lion, I think you're a horrible king. I'm stronger than you and better than you. I want to be king." The lion was perplexed, but thought to himself, how is he going to settle this? And then the elephant made a declaration. He said, "I challenge you. I challenge you to a wrestling match. And whoever wins that wrestling match gets to be the king." And so early morning, they went to the clearing and all the animals were there. And they watched this fierce and ferocious wrestling match, thumping and bumping and hitting and crashing. And at the end of the wrestling match, the lion lost. He was really sad, but he had to keep his word. So he left the jungle and just stayed at the outskirts while the elephant became the ruler. The elephant was pompous and proud and arrogant. He wasn't a just ruler at all. He bullied all the other animals and made them obey and serve him at all times. And he was never a really good judge. He didn't do any good for the people, the animals in the forest. All the animals started to complain, but they didn't know what to do. So they approached the clever tortoise, and he had an idea. He had them dig a huge pit, and he went to the lion and said to the lion, "King Lion, I can restore your throne to you. Are you willing to come back?" He said, "I don't mind being the king of the jungle, but I already gave my word to the elephant." He said, "Don't worry about that. I'm going to get rid of that proud and arrogant elephant." So he went to the elephant and announced to the elephant, "Oh, great elephant, you're so handsome. You're so regal. We want to give you a coronation ceremony. You deserve a huge crown." Well, the elephant, being the proud and arrogant king that he was very happy to finally be accepted and recognized by all the animals. So they fixed the date, called for the musicians, got their regal clothes, got a lot of food. Unknown to the elephant, the throne was placed on top of a hole with raffia mats covering it. And then on the morning of the coronation, they led the elephant in a procession, singing, "Let's crown the elephant. Eweku ewele. Let's crown the elephant. Eweku ewele." Dancing and drumming. And when it was time to sit on the throne, the elephant sat with a thud and fell into the ditch. "Ah!" he screamed. "What's happening?" And then all the animals confronted him and told him what a bad ruler he'd been and how they wanted the lion back. The elephant realized his folly and begged and pleaded to be pulled out of the ditch and promised to never disturb them again and allow the lion back to be king. And that was what they did. The end.
Fantastic. That was great. Thank you for sharing that. That's
You're
really
welcome.
good. So that's a traditional story, is it? From Western Nigeria, did you say?
From Western Nigeria, yes, the Yoruba tribe. So the chant I was saying has a Yoruba version, but I just
Uh,
translated that into English. And the
okay.
Ewekwewele is like the refrain, that the
Yeah.
listeners would say while listening to the story.
Wonderful. And so, Rashidat, how would you approach the teaching? How would you incorporate that into teaching? Would that be for uh, younger learners, I guess, sort of the 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds that you were talking about?
Yes, ideally, but interestingly, these stories can be adapted to anyone and everyone. So if I was um, the two topics that I'd love to relate that story to would be
Mhm.
onomatopoeia and imperatives. So if I was telling that story to children, I would probably use more imperatives. "Get me my horn. Where's my food? Bring me this," things like that. "Stand up,
Yeah.
sit down." I would use that. And I would, in the role play, ask the learners to do the same. Like, okay, what commands would you give if you were the king elephant? And things like that. I would also look at bump, crash, thump, things like that. And I would ask them to give more, sounds like that. But if I was to do that with older learners, we would
Yeah.
do something different. I would ask them to tell the story from the perspective of the elephant, you know, or I would ask them to create a song or a poem or, different things just around that. I could ask them to create a comic. It depends on, how old they are. But even for the older learners, I might not use this particular story for senior, like older teens, but I believe that all stories are amenable to anything. I might use the story, but in my story, I would be talking about leadership. I would
Yeah.
ask them to write an essay. So I'd use the story just like an introduction to the class, but the class itself would probably be looking at leadership styles, different types of leadership, monarchy, democracy. So there are many ways I could weave that story depending on the learners I'm teaching.
Yes, of course, I can see it now. And the story you told could also be about conspiring against leaders and
Yes, yes.
politics and
Politics in general.
manipulating people, etc. as well.
Exactly. Greed, the greed of man,
Yeah.
the the traits of a good leader. We could bring a lot of topics out of that.
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know that you are involved in a lot of, well, I think you're involved in a lot of teacher training about stories and are, I believe, in communities of practice with other teachers related to storytelling. Is that right, or am I making that up?
You are right. I do belong to communities. One community of practice
Yeah.
regarding storytelling, and then we had the group that we had for your interactive storytelling session. But the Crest was a course I took that actually showed me how, just introduced me to using storytelling in the classroom, and this was something that. After the course, we have a group on Facebook, Creative and Engaging Storytelling for Teachers, where we all get to meet and discuss our ideas. And after that, I did also get the opportunity to bond with African storytelling teachers. So we were
Right.
able to give a webinar within Africa ELTA, also about using storytelling in the classroom. And just recently, I did a storytelling education global online conference with some of the members of that community of practice. So I think it's been something that's very good for us, because a lot of times we attend courses, we take courses, but because we don't have any support or we don't have any follow-up, we find yourself going back to the status quo and what you used to do in your lessons before you learned the new technique, and you sort of forget if you're not careful. So that has been really helpful for me.
Oh, yes, it's so important, isn't it, to be able to follow up whatever, if it's a conference session or a course, to be able to continue experimenting with it and sharing, if you can, with
Yes.
the other people in a course is so important. So that's really interesting that you were able to connect with other African storytellers or other teachers interested in storytelling. Did you find a lot of differences or similarities with those storytellers, particularly if they were based in other countries?
Um, I haven't seen many differences, I have to be
Right.
honest. We have more similarities. But of course, we have some of us are teachers in teacher education, some of us
Mhm.
are teachers at elementary, secondary. But at the core, we all love storytelling, and we all find different ways to use it in the classroom. And we share ideas about what worked for us. And sometimes we even share videos of our classes, to give other people ideas. And we explain, people ask questions, okay, how do you do that? Or I want to do this, do you think it's going to work? And other people share what they think, and it helps. And I've also been very lucky that I was able to present at a conference, two conferences, in fact,
Yeah.
about one, the ELTAN in Nigeria and the Africa ELTA in Angola, also about using storytelling, in the English language classroom.
Oh, wow. And what did you end up presenting at those events? Was it something very general or specific to the techniques that you use?
I think the first one, in the one I did in Nigeria, was really specific. So I did talk about how we need the tone, use of pitch, use of gestures, how to lay out the classroom. I was really specific, to give a better idea of how I would do it, use of props, some of the activities that I do in class. But the one for Africa Elta, I think, was more general. I just identified how storytelling could really be of benefit in speaking, listening, reading, and writing. But the beauty of it was that we had a practical session where I had the participants at that conference create a story chain. So the way a story chain works, we grouped ourselves into groups of 10, and one person starts the story and then you pass it on. So it's really interesting how, the story changes. Sometimes the person that started the story had an intention for how he or she wanted it to end, and somebody changes it midway, and you see that, and it's really interesting. And same works with the learners. They make it, and I tell them it's your story. I did it in my classroom once. I said you can kill a character, you can even bring a character back to life. So because some of them were upset that a character got killed off, I was like, okay, it's your story, you can bring it back to life. But that really brings participation. So I like that. The second conference, even though the speech, the presentation itself was quite general, the participants got a practical feel of how they could use it in the classroom.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And I really like that idea of the chain story. Did you say it was
Yeah.
really, really good? I've had some experience of that, and it can be very. You never know what the results are going to be, do you? But it can be very funny or very dramatic, and it's certainly never boring.
Yeah, never boring.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite story, Rashidat? Is there one particular story, either a favorite story to use in the classroom, or a favorite story that you have for whatever other reason?
No, I don't really have a favorite story, but recently I've fallen in love with Joha stories. I don't know if you know of Joha.
No, I don't.
Okay, so Joha is a character, I think, in Middle Eastern culture, but he's also his character is similar to those trickster, but he always does funny things. Like his stories are hilarious, but they teach you a lesson. I don't know. So, for example, I'll just give a summary of one of the stories.
Great.
So Joha lived in a village, and the king or the chief, whatever, invited people to come for a feast, and Joha got an invitation. But Joha was kind of a miserly man. He didn't really spend much on his clothes or on himself. So when he went to the feast, he showed his invitation card, but he wasn't allowed to come in because he was poorly dressed. So he went back upset. And the next time there was a feast, he was invited again. He went to the market, the bazaar, and bought the best clothes, the best jewelry, the biggest turban he could find. And when he went back to the feast, he was allowed in and escorted and put in a place of pride and importance. And when it was time for the guests to eat, others were putting the food in their mouth and enjoying the meal. Joe has started stuffing the food into his trousers and his shirt sleeves and his collar. And people were surprised under his turban. Like, what's happening? Why are you doing this? He said, well, the last time he came poorly dressed, he wasn't allowed to come in. Now that he came well dressed, he was allowed. So that means it's the clothes that are entitled to the food, not the person. So that's a hilarious story, but it also, has a lesson in it.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting. Really good.
So I'm researching more into Joha stories. I really enjoy reading them.
How do you spell Joha? Is it as it sounds, or
Joha?
Joha. Okay, great.
Some people spell it Juha, but anyone you search, you probably find it.
Right.
The same character, I think, in some places is called Nasruddin Hoja, but it's basically the same character with different names.
Okay, interesting. And so, if you were to give advice to teachers who may be listening out there, who are very interested in starting to use storytelling techniques with their students, and perhaps they haven't done much, if any, how would you suggest they start?
I think I'll just suggest with telling a story, either at the end of your class or at the beginning, maybe as a warmer. But it's always good. I found it really beneficial to join courses and be part of a community. But you don't have to, wait for that before you can start. And if you, just Google storytelling in the classroom, you will find some YouTube videos, that can kick you off if you're not confident. But I think as teachers, we're all sort of natural storytellers. So let's just start and then, find a way we can use those stories with the techniques, even if it's something as simple as role play. So some of the activities that you would have done as pre-reading or pre-reading activities, the same activities can be done as pre-storytelling activities. So you could just adapt some of the things that you've been doing in class, but instead of having it read from a book or from a passage or from a text, tell it as a story. Have your learners share their own stories. You just find the engagement is so much more, and you can do more with speaking, especially.
Yes, of course. And what about the other skills? If a teacher wanted to incorporate reading or writing into their storytelling class, how would you suggest they best do that?
I think with teaching, I always like to do a lot of experimentation, but I
Mm,
prefer to start with the story. But it
yeah.
does vary. So sometimes I would start with pre-teaching vocabulary. If I know that some of the words in that story are going to be unfamiliar to the learners, or some of the things I want to pass across. So I would start with pre-teaching, but a lot of the times, even when I want to use it to hammer on grammar points, I start with the story, then I go into the plenary to explain the grammar point. Then we tell the story again. Or sometimes if I've recorded myself, they just listen to the story again and try to then identify some of those grammar points. So the first listening is just to enjoy and understand the story, and then subsequent listening would be, to apply whatever I wanted them to apply. But in some cases, so there was a time I was teaching contractions in class. I had taught the contractions, and I decided to use the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs just to have an activity in the classroom. So we had done the contractions, we had done some examples, and then I told the learners, I knew most of them were familiar with that story. I said, I'm going to tell the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I want you to listen and write any contraction you hear me saying while I'm telling the story. So that was as simple as that activity was. So I told the story, they listened, and when I finished, I gave everybody the opportunity to say the contractions that they heard, and I wrote them out on the board and split them up again, something like that.
Of course, yeah, that's a very good idea. And that involves the students actually reading along with you, is that right? And spotting
They
the contractions?
listening. I was telling the story
Listening.
from memory. Yes. I
Okay.
was telling the story from memory, and they were listening, and just as they hear a contraction, they write it down. And why I mentioned this is that this is a story that they are all familiar with, so they don't have to focus for the plot. They were
Hmm.
focusing for my contractions. But if it's a new story that I know they don't know, I would start with the story without any activity linked to it, allow them to absorb the story, and then introduce whatever aspect of English I wanted to talk about, and then listen to the story again and do the activity.
Yes, of course. I like that idea of using a story that they would be familiar with because that makes sense that they don't have to worry about. I think definitely, as you say, the first time someone is listening to a story, they want to know uh, what's going to happen. They're pulled along by the plot. So
Yeah.
that's a very good advice for teachers to do that if you're focusing on grammar or vocabulary.
Mm.
So Rashida, I'm I've also seen on your About Me page that you passionately advocate for literacy and education by hosting camps and courses. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that aspect of your work.
Yes, I can. And it's something I love to do. And it's something I've been doing for about 4 or 5 years now. Every
Mhm.
holiday, I try to organize a reading program. I have different foci sometimes, but generally it's about getting the learners or the children to come in to have access to books, to explore books. So for example, I had one last year. It was called a literacy boot camp, and then I focused on speaking, listening, reading and writing with vocabulary. Those were the 5 core areas. But the one I had the year before last was just titled genres of texts. So we started looking at the different types of genres. I asked the learners which ones they preferred. We looked at the characteristics of each genre: fiction, historical fiction, comedy, adventure, things like that. And at the end of it was a 2-day camp. At the end, I had them write a story of their preferred genre. So there's always so much. In the past, this year, I didn't hold any camp because I've now created a nonprofit organization, which is a mobile library. It's called the Mobile Reading Room. And what we do is that we take books to some of the underserved communities, and we do this on weekends. Actually, we just take the books to them. We do read alouds. We do creative response activities based on the read alouds, and we allow them to borrow books and return after a week or 2 weeks. So that's been my focus for this year, because I just felt that the other camps were a bit limiting. Those were all paid camps, and those were attended by my own acquaintances, people I knew. Not always, they all needed it, but I felt I wanted to reach out to those that couldn't afford it or were far away from where they could get access to books. But I haven't stopped. I'm hoping to try to find a way to also continue with the paid camps and programs. There was one I had, we called it RAVE, and RAVE was an acronym for Reading and Vocabulary Expose. I can't even remember what the E was for anymore. So I just give them those names sometimes, and we just try to look at different aspects of reading and literacy.
Wonderful. And you spoke a little bit about the mobile library, which I came across the website and your Instagram account when I was connecting with you, and it looks fabulous. There's some amazing pictures there of what I presume is teachers with big picture books talking to children who look completely captivated. And it must be quite an opportunity that you're giving those students and those teachers to be able to have access to books. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it is wonderful. So a lot of those teachers are my friends. They're volunteers. And we go to those communities. One of the communities, they don't even have a school there because it's somewhat in the backwoods, but the other community they do. So those are some of the communities where their English wouldn't be as fluent as others. But after just 3 months of reading with them regularly, you see them communicating better in English. You see them more confident. We see those differences, more creative. If we give them a task, so maybe once we read a story about Alice in Wonderland, and I gave them, I'm trying to remember a good one. I read a story about the stick man, and I gave them some pieces of lollipop sticks to create anything they could with the sticks. And one of the students created a stick man, and I was so impressed. Like, I never thought they could do that. I was thinking, okay, they'd make houses. I gave samples. We did a house, like a pentagon shaped house, things like that. That was what most of them did. But they were able to express themselves more and just talk about their ideas. It's really satisfying to be able to do that. It makes me go back over and over.
Wonderful. And people, if they wanted to, can get updates about that site. They can donate or they can volunteer. Is that right? And
yes.
In order to do that, they should go to the website, mobilereadingroom.org.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. And that's something you just started this year, or is it?
It's actually, this is the second year. It started last year. So this is the second year it's running, but I think this year we got the website this year, and even for the donations, we're just about to start. We've been collecting donations in kind before now. People have been donating books, but now we're fully registered, so the bank account is coming up and everything, so we're still growing.
Oh, wonderful initiative. I imagine it takes up quite a lot of your time.
It used to. It used to, because initially it wasn't easy, but we did come up with a sort of plan about, things to do, activities to do, books to read ahead of time. So it's mainly weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, and now I do have some volunteers, so I don't have to be at all the sessions. Initially, I every weekend I was booked. I had to be there, but
Right.
yeah, so what is taking up more of my time now is around, getting more communities to key in and be willing to participate, and also getting more support, from financially, basically. Yeah.
Of course, of course. And it's called the Mobile Reading Room. Is it just one? It's not just one group of books that travels around, is it? Is it several
At,
or
at the moment, it's just one group of
just the
books.
one? Okay.
Yes, but we're looking at, part of making it sustainable is that if we're able to get more communities to welcome us, those communities where we already have a strong presence, we could leave them a collection of books, to exchange within themselves, to sort of run the program almost on their own while we check in from time to time. But for now, it's just one set of a lot of books. We have two and a half suitcases full. So
Oh wow. And how do the people who are actually moving the library get around?
so it's still a really small operation. I use my husband's car. He has
Okay.
I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's a Sienna station wagon side of kind of car, so it's kind of big. So we use that to lug the books and the volunteers around. But we are planning to get a bus that would be the mobile library, because at the moment when we're done, we have to put the books back in the house and then put them back in the car when we want to go out. But once we have our own vehicle, it could just house the books permanently.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I wish you all the best of success with that.
Thank you.
And well, another, as I said, when I was starting to follow the links that when I was looking to research the show notes for this, I found you're particularly interested also in teaching with emotional intelligence,
Yes.
and I'd love to hear more about that. How was it that you became particularly interested in that aspect of psychology or of teaching?
Yeah, so I've always been quite fortunate that I had good teachers. I think
Mhm.
maybe just one or two teachers that I don't remember so fondly, but I realized that so many other people have horrible experiences of school and of their teachers.
Right.
And even as I came into the profession, I realized a lot of teachers are, well, not a lot. I realized that some teachers are bitter, they're overworked, they're stressed. Some people just believe that they should teach with tough love, the same way they were taught. I mean, for a lot of us, I'm seeing something in the conversation about using a rod. A lot of teachers were raised with a rod, but we need to be able to move away from that type of teaching so that the learners can love learning. They can open their minds and their selves. And I think at a point someone just casually mentioned to me that they think I'm quite emotionally intelligent because of the way I interact and try to diffuse situations. I'm not always
Mhm.
successful, but it's something I try to do to keep the peace, to speak in a way where you know things can move forward. So when the person said that, I thought to myself, well, okay, I've been looking to find my skills and people have noticed this about me. I need to do a bit more research, take some courses, share what I know, share what I believe in. And
Yeah.
because I believe, it's important for us as teachers. It will help prevent burnout. It will help us to give our best if we're emotionally intelligent. And then it will help us to give the best to the learners. We can also, because emotional intelligence is basically about self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So as teachers, we do deal with learners, with parents, with colleagues, with management. We need to be able to manage these relationships properly, and emotional intelligence equips us with some of those tools that we need to do that. So,
Right. And if teachers want to kind of learn more about this or to develop their aspect of emotional intelligence, what would you suggest they do? Is it through trying to become more reflective, or are there other ways that teachers can actually develop in this way?
I think you did hit it on the head. Reflection and introspection is a big part. I mean, if you're able to really understand yourself, you know your triggers, you know what helps you to work better, you can do some things to work on your strengths, you can do some things to improve on your weak points, you become a better person. And if you do need to avoid some places, some people, some things, you do that. Just before you explode, so that is the beginning. That ability to be reflective, to reflect, to be mindful. Mindfulness is another important practice that I think helps us, after the stressful day. You can ground yourself during the day. If you're mindful of what's going on, you tend to be able to respond rather than react. Then you regret your reactions, things like that. So that is a good beginning. But there are tools out there are trainings out there that can sometimes help. Sometimes just something as simple as asking a friend, because some of us find it difficult to see our own reflections clearly. But if you ask a trusted friend, what are my strengths? What do you think I need to improve on? And even that ability to have a growth mindset. There's so much around it, but yes, reflection is the first place.
Yes, I think you've hit upon lots of interesting things there: growth mindset, mindfulness, reflection, and not to just try and do it on your own. I think it's so important for teachers to reach out to colleagues, reach out to other people online or wherever you can find communities of practice of teachers to help develop your interests with other people who are developing them at the same time. For me, that is definitely the key. And one of the things I really think is interesting for teachers to do is to observe other teachers. I don't know if you've done much of that, but peer observation of colleagues can really help you
Yes, I
see
agree.
things that perhaps, yeah. Have you done much of that, Rashidat?
Um, I have, but it's a two-way thing, because when I started
Yeah.
teaching, because I started in a volunteer capacity, I was really lucky to have that opportunity to understudy and observe, other teachers, just for the purposes of learning and growing. And as the years, went on, I'm now in a middle management position where I get to observe teachers in a bid to help them improve their own practices. But I still learn a lot from, you know, talking with them, discussing with them, while trying to identify things that they did well and things that can be done better. It's just that sometimes when you're observing, as a superior, you tend to have a different mindset, and sometimes even the
Yeah.
interaction between you and the person you're observing changes. They become a bit more apprehensive because their performance review may depend on it, unlike when it's just a neutral peer observation. But I find it, all of it is useful, especially for me as a person, as an individual.
Of course. I mean, that's always the case. Even if you have the best intentions in mind and do what you can to tell the teacher that you're observing, why you're observing them, and, focus upon the supportive aspects of it. If you do have that relationship with them as their kind of supervisor or line manager or whatever,
Yeah.
I think it's natural for teachers to feel a little bit nervous about being observed. But it's
Yeah.
definitely for me. It's one of those things. I feel it's there's such potential there of observing other teachers teach and you being observed, that is not being tapped into. So I keep coming back to something as being something very important for teachers to be involved in.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's really powerful. There's something we do in our school sometimes, where we call it co-planning. So that also is something that is really helpful. If you can co-plan with the same teachers in your form or same teachers in your subject area, and then have them even observe you after that, it can do wonders, to improve us.
Yeah, definitely. That's really, really interesting. And another thing that I've discovered following the links, as I said before, I have been able to see that you were involved with a colleague in the British Council's World Teachers' Day on a session called Planning Lessons for the 21st Century Learner. Could you speak a little bit about that? What is it that you think is different about the 21st century learner that you need to have a particular focus on?
Yes. So my colleague Hafsa and I, we did think about it, and a lot of times we tend to discuss, the different the differences between when we were in school and now, and we know that it's not the same. And one of the things we did even in that um, presentation was to ask the audience, what are some of the traits or characteristics of 21st century learners? And a lot of people talked about the fact that they're, tech savvy, they're highly inquisitive. When we were younger, whatever the teacher said was law. But now, we do say that you can't afford to be the sage on the stage anymore, because Google is there to tell them everything. We even have AI, which some of us are yet to come to terms with, threatening you. So we need to be able to move on, to be able to engage the 21st century learners. Some people even mention that they have shorter attention span. I'm not sure that's the case, but we agreed to say that they prefer multimedia. So those are some of the things that we need to put into consideration when planning lessons for them. How can you include multimedia? How can you engage them? Do you need to include technology? How can you teach to their inquisitive nature and their individualistic nature? All of that, how can you bring it together in the classroom? So we ended up talking about the fact that we can even introduce them, ask them questions before you plan your lessons, so they can be of help. And we talked about things like polls and surveys and needs analysis before your planning, to try to really understand what they want. And we also looked into personalized learning a little bit, to be able to cater to some of their needs.
Okay, that's really, really interesting to hear. And to come back to technology, what in the context of Nigeria, um, what what amount of technology do you think learners and teachers have access to? Is it something that's growing? Is it mainly mobile technology? Would it be used generally in education? Is that kind of increasing, or what is the current situation?
Yeah, I think it's definitely increasing, but it will probably depend on which part of the country you're in.
Mhm,
So if
mhm,
you're in the more rural areas, like even in the rural areas, they are being slowly introduced to mobile technology. So
mhm,
WhatsApp is everywhere. So you find teachers sending links through WhatsApp, sending pictures and text through WhatsApp for learners,
mhm,
even in those areas that are not so high tech. But in the cities, so for example, where I work, it's a private institution. We have whiteboards we have smart boards in some of the classes. We have a projector, we have our laptops. The learners themselves do not have devices, but we do have an ICT lab where, if need be, they would go in to use the systems. And many of them have tablets or laptops in their houses. So we use Google Classroom to send assignments, to send video links, to send things like that. So more and more it's becoming used. Some people use Microsoft Teams and other software. Even in my class where the learners don't have access to their own personal devices, I was able to use a Kahoot game. So I just borrowed phones from my friends, my co-teachers, and I had them in groups of 4, and I used my laptop to project the game, and the children were able to participate fully. So more and more we are using technology, and I think it's here to stay, but it does depend largely on what part of the country you're in,
Of
and
course, yeah.
possibly on what type of school, because some of the government
Yeah.
owned institutions may not be as well off, but an average school, even the government ones, would have an ICT lab.
Oh, right. That's really interesting to hear. It's something I'm particularly interested in because in my work, one of the projects that we are involved in is trying to use sort of low tech approaches,
Yeah.
essentially kind of Telegram or WhatsApp,
Yes.
to help teachers develop, and providing sort of development through Telegram, so either PDFs or short audios or even some videos, to be able to help the teachers develop in certain areas of their practice. So I think that for me is kind of key. And you think that a lot of even rural school teachers would have access to mobiles, or more so that is the case in Nigeria?
I think most of the teachers would have access to mobiles.
Right.
Um, and I think even the phones that are not so high tech will be able to support WhatsApp. They may not be able to support Telegram, I'm not sure, but it's almost the same thing.
Yeah.
The only other issues may be around money to purchase data, but I think it's still something that is very useful, and people are using here WhatsApp and Telegram for teacher training, even for the learners themselves. If your parents don't have a smartphone, your uncle or brother or somebody around you is likely to have one.
Oh, wonderful. That's great to hear. So I think we're coming towards the end of what we'd planned to talk about, or what I planned to ask you about. I did want to ask for anyone listening in live whether they wanted to join us to ask any questions or make any comments. But where we've had quite a few people coming and going, there isn't anyone currently in the studio. So I'd just like to say, as I've been exploring your online profile, Rashidat, I keep finding more and more that you're becoming involved in, which is fabulous. You're so active. I wanted to ask you, is there anything else that I haven't discovered yet that is part of your professional, educational, teaching life?
I guess so. So last year, I was fortunate to be selected as one of those to participate in exploratory action research with the
Oh,
British
right.
Council. We are launching our publication. It was focused on gender. So the publication is being launched on the 28th of October, and that's something I was really happy to be part of. I've always, wanted to be able to explore things I find challenging in the classroom, and I didn't really know how I could go about it. So being part of that, gave me great insight, and we were really guided on, how to craft our questions, questionnaires, how to collect our data, how to write the reports, but outside of all that, I think what I loved about it was that it allowed me to connect really deeper with my learners. And they asked me, at the end, I explained to them that, okay, I'm doing this research. I want to find out this. And they were eager to ask me, what was the end result. And I was also able to have a focus group with other English teachers in my school, which was also very helpful. We had some discussions that we've been having informally, but this was like a meeting focusing on those topics. And we were able to share ideas and see the differences. So my school where I work, we have nursery, primary, and secondary. So I got all the teachers from the whole range to meet. And we had some robust discussion about how does reading change and confidence level change as the learners grow. It was really enlightening. And just the fact that the learners were excited to fill my questionnaire, they felt that they were being listened to. They had a lot of interesting suggestions for me, and it was really nice.
Oh, that's fabulous to hear. If may I ask, who from the British Council is involved in helping run that program, or who are the people involved? Just in case I might know them as they.
You might. I think Paula is somewhere in South America.
Paula
So you might know.
Raballedo
Yes,
from
Paula was
Chile. Yeah, I've been
yes.
trying to get Paula to join me on this in this program for months now, but she's so busy
She's really
doing what
busy,
she's
and
doing.
she does a
She
great
hasn't
job.
been able to. We haven't been able to connect or find a date. But I'm
Yeah.
hopeful that in the future we'll be able to get her on, because she's fascinating and wonderful.
She is. She's really good. She helped us in such a good way that made things easy to understand. The way we look at research, especially those of us that are not too academically inclined, is daunting, and she was able to really break it down for us.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I mean, I think that's the whole point of this exploratory action research, is to kind of demystify research and try
Yes.
to make it more relevant than a lot of academic research is for
Exactly.
teachers, really.
Yes.
So moving away from the kind of this sort of closed academic university kind of environment, and move it into the
Yes.
classroom and make it relevant and meaningful for what actually happens, and to promote change in the classroom. I think it's a fantastic thing to do. For many years, we did it in the Americas. We did it in Chile, in Mexico, in Colombia a little bit, and in Peru. And we had so many wonderful research projects out of it. So I'm sure it's something that is very beneficial.
Yes, I believe so.
Great. So that's one of the things. Is there anything else, Rashidat, that we haven't mentioned?
I'm not really sure, because I am involved in a number of things. But well, I one thing that I'm happy that I've been able to do, I've wanted to do for a long time, is to write a children's book. So
Oh, wow.
I was able to write and publish one last year. And
oh, fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's another thing I hope to be able to do more of. Yeah.
Is it what age is it targeted for? Is it a picture book, or is it
It's a, I think I would call it maybe a novella. It's a 50-page chapter book. It has 5 chapters, but it's a really tiny one. And the age would be 8 to 11, 12. Yeah. So it's a book that I wrote. I've been wanting to write fiction. It wasn't even the title I originally had in mind. But last year, Ramadan, I had people asking me, about Ramadan. So I decided to just write a book that would expose people of other faiths to what Ramadan means to the Muslims. So it's titled Ramadan Escapades, and I had fun writing it.
Oh, fabulous. That sounds great. And it's done through depiction of what it means to a particular person or people or families.
Yes, so it's a fiction that follows the journey of a boy. He's, I think, a 14-year-old boy in that story, and how he spent his Ramadan and some of the challenges he had, while fasting and things like that. And just family, it's more of family in, things that happen in the home.
Yeah.
His relationship with his siblings and his grandparents, things like that.
Oh, great. And is this the first of many more to come?
I hope so. I do hope so.
Have you got any other ideas for things you want to write?
I do have a few ideas, and even before I wrote this one, I had some work on this a Creative Commons site African storybook for younger learners. I love Julia Donaldson, I think is her name. I love her work because she's able to use rhymes to tell stories. So that's something I also want to try to explore, for the younger learners. But so I'm looking at work for younger learners and something also for that middle school age group.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, I will definitely try and seek out the book that you've written and see if I can get hold of it. And look forward to hearing about more of your wonderful projects. So I think
Thank you.
I think we can wrap things up now. I just want to say thank you very, very much for agreeing to come on the show and sharing all of the great projects and your kind of journey through education with us, Rashida. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Graham. It's been fun being here.
I'm so glad we connected the way we did, and I heard about some of the things that you were doing. So that was wonderful. If you would like to suggest anyone else I should have on my show, that goes for you, Rashidat, or any one of the listeners who is out there at the moment, then please get in touch. I'm always looking for interesting guests. So keep it in mind and definitely send them my way.
All right, we'll do.
Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. That brings us to the end of today's Twilight Show. Many, many thanks to today's special guest, Rashidat Sadiq, for sharing all of her stories with us and techniques and other projects that she is involved in. And thank you very much also to all of you who joined us live, and also to all of you who are listening back to the recording. And so that is it from me. And there are Teachers Talk radio shows all week on all manner of interesting topics. So please listen in live to the recordings. And I will hope you will all join me again the next time at the same time. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Just Stop Oil have spray painted universities across England. The climate campaigners used orange paint to coat buildings at the universities of Leeds, Manchester and Cambridge, according to a report on the BBC News website. The latest protests came after other universities across the country were also targeted. Just Stop Oil say the protests are against the UK government's plans to licence new oil and gas projects. The BBC report featured comments from a spokesperson for University of Leeds, which said that whilst they support the right to legal protest, they were hugely disappointed that the results had been vandalism. At the University of Cambridge, a protester painted the neo-Gothic King's College orange and was confronted by members of the public. The majority of protesters have been arrested and charged with criminal damage. After the Tory party conference, attention turned to Labour's proposals for education should they be elected. Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Education Secretary, said a Labour government would upskill non-maths specialists in primary schools to create the maths equivalent to phonics. The announcement marks a clear dividing line with Conservative policies, with Labour focused on the youngest school children, whilst Conservatives have focused on extending compulsory maths teaching to 18. The curriculum review would also be tasked with bringing maths to life and directing teachers to show children how numeracy is used in the world around them. The plans have been tentatively welcomed by the NAHT, and General Secretary Paul Whiteman said it was vital that Labour builds upon the excellent maths teaching that is already taking place. Jeff Barton of Askell added, ensuring that primary schools have the funding for the resources they need was vital to improving attainment. After the distressing news of events unfolding in Israel, many news outlets have reported on government plans to support Jewish schools with extra security guards. Security and police patrols have already been increased, but the government has given £3 million in funding. Measures taken by some schools already include pupils being told to remove blazers and school trips being postponed. The BBC also reported that 3 schools have closed due to concerns. The Community Security Trust CST, which provides protection for Jewish communities in the UK, said there had been 139 anti-Semitic incidents since the recent attacks on Israel. At this time last year, there had been only 21 incidents. A government spokesperson said it was very concerned a small number of Jewish faith schools had temporarily closed, and that it would be working to support them to open safely. Finally, BBC Wales education correspondent Bethan Lewis writes that children as young as 7 or 8 are using social media, according to a major survey in Wales. Responses from more than 32,000 children aged 7 to 11 suggest almost half use social media sites or apps a few times a week. Public health experts said the data was concerning, as most social media carry minimum age recommendations of 13. Parents also responded, with many saying they found it hard to strike the right balance between the benefits and pitfalls of smartphones. Full details of the survey can be found on the BBC Wales section of the news website. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.